The little black girl grabbed the biker beside the rusted winch, claiming a dark van had followed her for hours. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. A quiet, humid evening settled over the town as the sounds of motorcycles hummed in the background. The air was thick with tension, but no one could have predicted what would unfold that night. In the midst of the quiet, a young girl appeared out of nowhere. Barefoot, her clothes torn and dirt-streaked, she ran toward a group of bikers gathered by an old, rusted winch at the edge of the parking lot. Her wide eyes were filled with terror as she grabbed the closest biker by the sleeve. "Please, help me. They've been following me for hours," she gasped, her voice trembling. She pointed desperately to a dark van idling nearby, its windows tinted, the engine running as it loomed like a predator waiting for its prey. The bikers, who were used to rough encounters, exchanged wary glances. They had seen their share of trouble in the past, but something about this girl, her fear, and the urgency in her voice made them hesitate. She was just a kid. "Who's following you?" One of the bikers, a tall man with a scarred face, asked as he knelt down to her level. The girl's lips quivered as she tried to explain, her words coming out in short bursts between heavy breaths. "A van. It's been following me. They want to take me," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. The biker stood up, looking at the others. They were a crew of tough, seasoned riders, men and women who had dealt with everything from gang wars to the dangers of the open road. But nothing had prepared them for the sight of a child, so scared, so vulnerable. "All right, we're going to get you out of here," the biker said firmly. He motioned to the others to prepare. The sound of motorcycle engines revving filled the air as the group of bikers quickly mobilized. The girl clung to the biker's arm, her small fingers trembling as they began to ride out of the parking lot. The van, noticing the bikers, slowly began to follow. The chase was on. With the wind whipping through her hair, the girl's heart raced in her chest as they sped through the streets. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the van, away from whoever was behind it. The bikers didn't ask questions, they just followed her lead, ready to face whatever came their way. As they navigated the city streets, the girl, now feeling the weight of the situation, began to explain more. She told them about the man in the van, how he had been watching her for weeks, and how she had tried to tell her parents, but they didn't believe her. The bikers nodded, understanding that sometimes the worst kind of danger came from those who were supposed to protect you. "Don't worry," the biker leader reassured her as they turned down a dark alley. "You're safe with us." But even as he said this, he knew the real danger wasn't over yet. As they continued down the deserted street, the van was still behind them, keeping just far enough back to avoid suspicion but close enough to strike. The bikers knew they had to act fast, or the girl would be in even more danger. The group of bikers quickly split into two, creating a decoy to confuse the van and force it into a dead-end street. As the bikers reached the end of the alley, they heard the unmistakable screech of tires behind them. The van had followed them into the trap. The biker leader signaled for everyone to stop, and they surrounded the van. The engine revved as the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in black, with a cold expression on his face. He looked at the bikers, then back at the girl, who was now hiding behind one of the bikes. The man sneered, but the bikers weren't afraid. They had seen threats before, but they weren't about to let anyone hurt this girl. "You've been following her," the biker leader growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man took a step back, his hand moving towards his jacket, but before he could reach for a weapon, the bikers had him surrounded. "You need to leave, now," the biker said. There was no hesitation in his voice, just a quiet promise of consequences if the man didn't listen. The man looked at the bikers one last time, then, realizing he was outnumbered, turned and got back into the van, speeding off into the night. As the van disappeared, the bikers remained vigilant, making sure the danger was truly gone. The girl, now safe, looked up at her protector with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. The biker gave her a small smile. "It's what we do. You're safe now. But deep down, they all knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. I cannot imagine the feeling of running for your life. A life filled with terror, with no one to turn to. The sound of motorcycles roaring in the distance, the flickering streetlights blurring in the rearview mirror, and the constant fear of what could be waiting around the corner. For this little girl, it was her reality. She was still holding onto the biker's sleeve, her grip tightening as the group sped down the dark roads. The wind whipped through her hair, but she barely noticed it. All she could think about was the van that had been trailing them for hours. The same van that had taken her brother, and the one she believed was now hunting her. The bikers, for their part, were moving with determination. They were following the girl's lead, staying one step ahead of the danger. But every turn, every twist in the road, brought them closer to the unknown. And with each passing moment, the girl's panic grew. The air grew colder as the group entered a narrow alley. The streetlights were fewer here, and the buildings towered above, casting long shadows over the road. It felt like a trap, but the bikers weren't backing down. They had made a promise, and they intended to keep it. This way, the girl whispered, her voice trembling. They've been following me for so long. My brother's still out there. The biker leader, a tall man with a gruff face, nodded. We'll find him, don't worry. We've got your back. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random act of cruelty. There was something more going on here, something darker. As they reached the end of the alley, the van appeared again. It was parked a few blocks down, just enough to be out of sight, but close enough to follow. The engine was running, the headlights flickering. The girl's eyes went wide, and she clutched the biker's arm harder. It's them, she said. They're waiting. The group slowed their pace, ready for anything. They didn't know who was in that van, or what they wanted with the girl, but they weren't about to let them take her. Not without a fight. The biker leader gave the signal, and the crew spread out, flanking the van on all sides. They knew this could escalate quickly, but they also knew that the girl's safety came first. As they approached the van, the doors slowly creaked open, revealing a tall figure in the shadows. He didn't move at first, his face obscured by the dim light, but the bikers knew he was the one they had been waiting for. The girl's eyes were fixed on him, and she started to back away. The man stepped forward, his expression cold, his voice low and threatening. You shouldn't have come here, he said, his words laced with menace. The bikers didn't flinch. They stood their ground, their hands resting on their weapons. You're not taking her anywhere, the biker leader growled. The man in the van's lips curled into a twisted smile. You think you can stop me? He asked, taking a step closer. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of violence. The girl's heart was pounding in her chest as she watched the scene unfold before her. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers had surrounded her, and they weren't going to let anything happen to her. Not tonight. The man in the van took another step forward, but the bikers didn't budge. They were ready. But then, just as the tension was about to snap, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The bikers turned their heads toward the noise, momentarily distracted. The man in the van took advantage of the opening and made a run for it. Go now, the biker leader shouted. Don't let him get away. The chase was on once again. The bikers revved their engines and tore after the van, speeding down the street in pursuit. The girl clung to the biker's back, her eyes scanning the street ahead. They had to catch him. They had to bring him down. The van weaved through the streets, but the bikers were faster. They knew the city better than anyone. Every turn, every alley was like a second nature to them. They were getting closer. The van swerved around a corner, but the bikers were right behind it. The van's tires screeched as it tried to make a sharp turn, but it lost control, skidding into a nearby ditch. The bikers pulled up, surrounding the vehicle. The man inside was trapped. The girl's heart raced as she watched the bikers approach. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The man in the van slowly opened the door, his hands raised in defeat. The bikers had won. The girl was safe. But the battle wasn't over yet. The man in the van wasn't going to give up so easily. The bikers knew they had to act fast, before he could make his next move. They quickly secured him and called the authorities. As the sirens grew louder, the girl took a deep breath, relief washing over her. She was free. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. There was more to this story. More answers to be found. and she was ready to find them. I cannot describe the feeling of relief that flooded through the little girl as the bikers surrounded the van, ensuring she was safe. After hours of running, of fearing for her life, it was finally over. Or so she thought. The man in the van was taken away by the authorities, and the sound of sirens filled the air, signaling that help had arrived. But there was something in the back of her mind, something that told her this wasn't the end. The bikers, her protectors, gathered around her, making sure she felt secure. The leader of the group, a man with a weathered face and a steady hand, knelt down to her level. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice rough but kind. She nodded slowly, too tired to speak, her eyes still wide with the horrors she had witnessed. He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe now. You're not alone anymore." The girl looked up at him, her small body trembling from the exhaustion and fear she had held in for so long. She didn't know how to respond. She wanted to say something, to thank them, but the words wouldn't come. The bikers, however, didn't need her to say anything. They understood. They always did. The leader turned to his crew, giving them the nod. "Let's get her home," he said. "We're not done yet." The group set off, their engines roaring back to life, cutting through the night as they made their way to the girl's house. She had told them her story, how the man in the van had been following her and her brother for weeks, how no one believed her when she tried to tell them. But now, it was all starting to make sense. This was no random act of cruelty. The bikers knew that they had to dig deeper. There was more to this story. The ride back was long, the wind howling in their faces, but the girl felt a sense of peace as she sat behind the biker leader, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. The city lights blurred around them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. But even as the feeling of safety began to settle in, the group was still on high alert. They knew that this was just the beginning. The man they had captured wasn't the only threat. There was something much larger at play, something that the bikers weren't going to ignore. As they reached her home, the girl's eyes scanned the quiet street, half expecting the van to show up again. She could still feel the eyes of the man burning into her, even though he was behind bars. The bikers pulled up to the curb, parking in front of her house. The girl climbed off the bike, her legs weak, but she stood tall. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The biker leader gave her a nod. "You're not alone anymore," he repeated, his voice full of conviction. He could see the fear still in her eyes, the uncertainty of what the next day would bring, but he knew she was strong. She had survived this far. The girl walked toward her front door, but before she could open it, the biker leader called out to her. "We'll be keeping an eye on you," he said, his voice firm. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call us." She nodded again, giving him a small smile, before disappearing inside. The bikers didn't leave immediately. They stayed in front of her house for a while, just to make sure she was safe. It was part of their code, part of who they were. They didn't just ride for the thrill. They rode for loyalty, for justice, and most of all, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. After a while, they all started their engines and rode off into the night, their headlights fading into the distance. The girl watched them go, her heart filled with gratitude and awe. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't facing it alone anymore. The bikers had kept their promise, and she would never forget that. As the night grew quieter, the city seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But for the girl, the road ahead was still uncertain. There was more to uncover, more to fight for. But as long as she had the bikers watching over her, she knew she could handle anything that came her way. I cannot express enough how quickly the atmosphere shifted from the quiet relief of safety to the cold grip of uncertainty. The girl, whose name was Maya, had been through so much already. What she thought was a final act of salvation, the bikers' arrival, was only the beginning of something deeper, something darker. As the night wore on, her thoughts drifted to her brother. What had happened to him? Why was he taken? The questions kept circling in her mind, but she knew she had to stay strong. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. The bikers had made a promise, but she could sense that there was more to it than they had let on. They knew something she didn't, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that something bigger was coming. The biker leader, Jack, had made sure she was safe in her home, but there was an underlying tension that even he couldn't shake. Maya could feel it in the air as she walked through the quiet house. hearing every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside. She knew she wasn't alone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. It wasn't the first time she'd felt like this. It was the same feeling she had when the van started following her, when she had first realized that her world had changed forever. The sense that she was always being hunted, always being watched, was something she couldn't get rid of. She sat down on the couch, her body tired but restless. She thought about the man in the van, the one who had taken her brother. She thought about his cold eyes, the way he had looked at her when he got out of the van. But she couldn't figure it out. Who was he? Why had he been watching her? Was there something more to this than just a random act of violence? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Maya stood up, her heart pounding, and walked over cautiously. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she was relieved to see Jack standing there, his leather vest shining under the porch light. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice steady but concerned. She nodded, trying to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." Jack stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before he closed the door behind him. He could tell something was off. Maya was trying to act like everything was fine, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear he had seen in his own eyes when he was a kid. "You know you can talk to me, right?" Jack said, his voice softer now. "I'm not going anywhere." Maya looked up at him, her lip trembling for just a second. "I just want to know why. Why us? Why my brother?" Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't have an easy answer. What Maya didn't know was that the threat against her family was far from over. The man in the van wasn't acting alone. There was a much larger network at play, and Jack had seen the signs. His crew had already started digging into the situation. They were pulling on threads, gathering information, and they were starting to piece together something that didn't sit right. The Serpents were more than just a gang. They were organized, well-connected, and dangerous. And the more they uncovered, the more Jack realized that Maya's family had been caught in the crossfire of something much bigger than they could imagine. "Maya," Jack said after a long pause, "we're going to get your brother back. But there's something you need to understand. This isn't just about you anymore. It's bigger than that. This has to do with the Serpents, and we can't let them get away with this." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The Serpents? She had heard the name before, but she didn't know much about them. All she knew was that they were dangerous, and that thought alone sent a wave of panic through her chest. "But what if they come back?" she whispered. Jack's expression hardened. "They will, but we're ready. We won't let them hurt you, or anyone else." Just then, the sound of motorcycles roared through the night air, interrupting their conversation. Jack's eyes flickered toward the window. "That's them," he said, his voice low. "We need to move. Now." Maya felt her heart skip a beat. The bikers were already here, preparing for what was to come. There was no time to waste. Jack motioned for her to follow him. "Stay close. It's not safe here anymore." They stepped outside, and Maya could feel the cold night air bite at her skin. The group of bikers was already gathered, their bikes lined up like soldiers ready for war. Jack gave the signal, and they all mounted their bikes in unison, the engines roaring to life. As the convoy sped off into the night, Maya felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers had made sure of that. Together, they would face whatever came next. The Serpents wouldn't stand a chance. I cannot express enough how quickly the atmosphere shifted from the quiet relief of safety to the cold grip of uncertainty. The girl, whose name was Maya, had been through so much already. What she thought was a final act of salvation, the bikers' arrival, was only the beginning of something deeper, something darker. As the night wore on, her thoughts drifted to her brother. What had happened to him? Why was he taken? The questions kept circling in her mind, but she knew she had to stay strong. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. The bikers had made a promise, but she could sense that there was more to it than they had let on. They knew something she didn't, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that something bigger was coming. The biker leader, Jack, had made sure she was safe in her home, but there was an underlying tension that even he couldn't shake. Maya could feel it in the air as she walked through the quiet house, hearing every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside. She knew she wasn't alone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. It wasn't the first time she'd felt like this. It was the same feeling she had when the van started following her, when she had first realized that her world had changed forever. The sense that she was always being hunted, always being watched, was something she couldn't get rid of. She sat down on the couch, her body tired but restless. She thought about the man in the van, the one who had taken her brother. She thought about his cold eyes, the way he had looked at her when he got out of the van. But she couldn't figure it out. Who was he? Why had he been watching her? Was there something more to this than just a random act of violence? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Maya stood up, her heart pounding, and walked over cautiously. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she was relieved to see Jack standing there, his leather vest shining under the porch light. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice steady but concerned. She nodded, trying to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." Jack stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before he closed the door behind him. He could tell something was off. Maya was trying to act like everything was fine, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear he had seen in his own eyes when he was a kid. "You know you can talk to me, right?" Jack said, his voice softer now. "I'm not going anywhere." Maya looked up at him, her lip trembling for just a second. "I just want to." "No, why? Why us? Why my brother?" Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't have an easy answer. What Maya didn't know was that the threat against her family was far from over. The man in the van wasn't acting alone. There was a much larger network at play, and Jack had seen the signs. His crew had already started digging into the situation. They were pulling on threads, gathering information, and they were starting to piece together something that didn't sit right. The Serpents were more than just a gang. They were organized, well-connected, and dangerous. And the more they uncovered, the more Jack realized that Maya's family had been caught in the crossfire of something much bigger than they could imagine. "Maya," Jack said after a long pause, "we're going to get your brother back. But there's something you need to understand. This isn't just about you anymore. It's bigger than that. This has to do with the Serpents, and we can't let them get away with this." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The Serpents? She had heard the name before, but she didn't know much about them. All she knew was that they were dangerous, and that thought alone sent a wave of panic through her chest. "But what if they come back?" she whispered. Jack's expression hardened. "They will, but we're ready. We won't let them hurt you, or anyone else." Just then, the sound of motorcycles roared through the night air, interrupting their conversation. Jack's eyes flickered toward the window. "That's them," he said, his voice low. "We need to move. Now." Maya felt her heart skip a beat. The bikers were already here, preparing for what was to come. There was no time to waste. Jack motioned for her to follow him. "Stay close. It's not safe here anymore." They stepped outside, and Maya could feel the cold night air bite at her skin. The group of bikers was already gathered, their bikes lined up like soldiers ready for war. Jack gave the signal, and they all mounted their bikes in unison, the engines roaring to life. As the convoy sped off into the night, Maya felt a sense of purpose wash over her. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers had made sure of that. Together, they would face whatever came next. The Serpents wouldn't stand a chance. I cannot describe the tension that hung in the air as the bikers rode closer to the industrial district. Hawk had never seen his crew so focused. Every rider was in sync, their bikes roaring through the night as if they were a single force of nature. The chase had been on for miles, but now it was getting real. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It was personal. Rick's son, Jamal, had been taken by the Serpents, and Hawk wasn't about to let them get away with it. He could still hear the terrified voice of Aisha, pleading for her brother to be brought back safely. Every mile that passed added to the weight of the promise he'd made. He'd given his word to Rick, and he wasn't about to break it. The road ahead was dark, the streetlights flickering in the distance. The sounds of the bikes filled the air, drowning out everything else. Hawk's eyes narrowed as he saw the flash of headlights ahead. It was the Suburban, still in the lead. The Serpents were trying to make a run for it, but they weren't going to get far. Hawk's grip tightened on the handlebars of his Road King, and he barked into his radio. "All teams, stay sharp. We're closing in." The bikes revved, and the convoy surged forward. They were getting closer to their target. The Suburban swerved down a narrow side street, but the bikers were ready. Clutch's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got eyes on it. We're following." The chase continued, weaving through the streets like a high-speed game of cat and mouse. Hawk's heart raced as they approached the heart of the industrial district. The buildings here were tall and imposing, casting long shadows over the road. This was the perfect place for an ambush, but Hawk wasn't worried. They had the advantage of numbers, and he knew they could outsmart the serpents. As they rounded a corner, Hawk saw the Suburban up ahead, its brake lights flashing. It was trying to shake them off, but the bikers were relentless. They had the speed and the skill to keep up. Hawk glanced over his shoulder, making sure the rest of the crew was still in pursuit. His team was right behind him, their bikes in perfect formation. There was no way the serpents were going to outrun them. The Suburban took a hard left, heading toward a narrow alleyway. Hawk's instincts kicked in, and he followed, his bike slicing through the night air. The alley was cramped, barely wide enough for the Suburban to fit, but Hawk wasn't concerned. He knew this neighborhood like the back of his hand. The serpents were trying to escape, but they had no idea that they were being herded into a trap. Hawk called out over the radio. "All teams, block the exits. We've got them cornered." The alley narrowed further as the bikers closed in on the Suburban. The driver slammed on the brakes, trying to make a sharp turn, but it was too late. The bike convoy had them trapped. The Suburban's tires screeched as it came to a halt. The driver glanced frantically around, realizing there was nowhere to go. Hawk's heart pounded in his chest as he slowed his bike to a stop. He could see the fear in the eyes of the man behind the wheel. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. It was about sending a message. Hawk dismounted his bike, his boots hitting the pavement with a thud. His crew followed suit, surrounding the Suburban. The air was thick with tension. Hawk's eyes locked onto the driver's, and he could see the man's hand shaking as he reached for the door handle. The serpents had underestimated the Iron Riders, and now they were going to pay. "Get out of the car." Hawk's voice was low, commanding. The man didn't move at first, his eyes darting around for an escape. But he knew there was no way out. Hawk wasn't backing down. "Get out of the car now." Slowly, the driver opened the door and stepped out, his hands raised in surrender. Hawk didn't take his eyes off him. "Where's Jamal?" The man swallowed hard, his face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Hawk stepped closer, his voice colder. "You're going to tell me where my brother is. Right now." The man hesitated, but before he could speak, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Hawk's eyes flicked toward the approaching lights, but he didn't flinch. They had to act fast. "Tell me, or things are going to get a lot worse for you." The man's face twisted in fear, and for a moment, it seemed like he was about to crack. But then he shook his head. "I'm not telling you anything." Hawk's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to let this man get away. He turned to his crew. "We need to find Jamal. Now." The bikers fanned out, combing the area for any sign of the boy. They searched the alley, the abandoned buildings, the old warehouses. But it was no use. There was no sign of him. Hawk's frustration mounted. They had to find Jamal. He couldn't let this go on any longer. As the sirens grew louder, Hawk knew they didn't have much time. He turned back to the man, his voice cold and determined. "Tell me where he is, or we'll make you wish you had." The man swallowed, his eyes darting around, and finally, he spoke. "He's at the old warehouse on West 3rd Street. But you're too late." Hawk's heart skipped a beat. "You're lying." The man shook his head. "I'm not. Go check for yourself." Hawk didn't waste another second. He mounted his bike and revved the engine. "Let's move." West 3rd Street. Now. The bikers followed, their engines roaring to life as they sped toward the warehouse. Time was running out, but they weren't going to stop until Jamal was safe. Hawk's mind raced as they rode, the city blurring around them. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time, that the serpents were going to do something terrible if they didn't get there fast. The sound of their bikes filled the night, a thunderous reminder that they wouldn't back down. They were coming for Jamal, and nothing was going to stop them. I can't explain the urgency that hit Hawk's chest as they approached the old warehouse on West 3rd Street. The sound of the engines was deafening, a rhythmic roar cutting through the cool night air, but his mind was focused entirely on the boy. Every second counted now. The serpents had Jamal, and he had no intention of letting them harm him. The warehouse loomed ahead, a crumbling shadow in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of oil and decay. Hawk's grip tightened on his bike's handlebars, the leather of his gloves creaking. The convoy of bikers was right behind him, their formation solid and tight. As they neared the warehouse, Hawk's heart rate picked up, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew he had to think clearly. The serpents were dangerous, but they were also predictable. Hawk had dealt with men like them before. Get ready, he barked over the radio. We don't know what we're walking into, but we're going in hot. No hesitations. The other bikers acknowledged his command, their voices steady but filled with the same intensity. Hawk could feel the cold sweat on his neck, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the responsibility he had taken on. They had been through hell and back together, but this was different. Jamal was Rick's son, and that made this personal. They pulled up in front of the warehouse, the bike screeching to a halt in perfect synchrony. The street was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of city traffic. Hawk signaled for everyone to dismount. Stay sharp, he warned. Check your corners. No one moves until I say. They moved like a well-oiled machine, scanning the area, their eyes constantly shifting. Hawk's pulse thundered in his ears as he approached the door. It was ajar, just wide enough to slip through, but it didn't matter. He could already feel the presence of the serpents inside, the tension thick in the air. He motioned for Bear to take point, the massive biker nodding in understanding. Bear pushed the door open slowly, making no sound. Hawk's instincts screamed at him to charge, but he held back. Patience was key. They moved inside, weapons ready, their boots making no noise on the dusty concrete floor. The warehouse was vast, the space littered with old machinery and crates. Shadows flickered in the dim light, creating an almost ghostly atmosphere. They heard muffled voices from the far end of the room. Hawk's gut tightened. It's them, he muttered. Stay quiet. They crept forward, sticking to the shadows. Hawk's mind raced as they drew closer to the voices. His heart was hammering in his chest, his thoughts constantly flicking to Jamal. What if they were too late? What if the boy was already hurt? As they neared the corner, Hawk motioned for the others to stop. He peered around the edge of a stack of crates and saw them. Two serpent members, rough-looking men with tattoos covering their arms and necks, standing guard near a beaten-up chair where a figure was tied up. The boy, Jamal, was there, his hands bound to the chair, his face bruised but alive. Hawk's blood ran cold. He had to act. Move in, Hawk hissed. The bikers didn't hesitate. They stormed the room, guns and fists ready. You picked the wrong fight, Hawk growled as he stepped forward, his voice like thunder. The serpents froze, their eyes wide with surprise. One of them reached for a gun, but before he could pull it, Bear slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. The other serpent turned and tried to make a run for it, but Diesel was faster, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him into the wall. Not so fast, Diesel snarled. Hawk was at Jamal's side in seconds, his hands already cutting through the ropes. You're safe now, kid, he said, his voice soft but firm. Jamal's wide, terrified eyes met his, and he nodded weakly. Thank you, the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Hawk didn't say anything. He just helped the boy stand, his hands steady as he supported him. Bear, make sure they don't move, Hawk ordered, his eyes never leaving Jamal's face. Bear nodded and turned to keep the serpents pinned down. Jamal, we're getting you out of here, Hawk said, guiding him toward the exit. The rest of the bikers were already rounding up the serpents, making sure they stayed put. Hawk could feel the weight lifting from his chest. They had done it. They had saved him. As they reached the bikes, Jamal's legs wobbled, but he managed to stay on his feet. Hawk placed him gently on his bike and looked at the others. Let's get out of here. Now. The bikers mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life in perfect synchrony. Hawk led the way, with Jamal riding behind him. The convoy moved fast, weaving through the streets as they made their way back to safety. The serpents wouldn't be able to catch up now. They had won. Hawk's eyes flicked to Jamal in his rearview mirror, the boy clinging to him with a newfound strength. The road ahead was still long, but for now, they were safe. And that was all that mattered. The city lights flickered in the distance as they rode off into the night, the sounds of their bikes filling the air, a signal that the Iron Riders had kept their promise. The serpents wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. Not while Hawk and his crew were around. I cannot describe the sense of urgency that still clung to the air as Hawk led the bikers through the dark streets, Jamal clinging to him tightly. The Iron Riders had rescued the boy, but Hawk knew that the battle wasn't over. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the rush of victory mixed with the knowledge that they had made powerful enemies. The serpents wouldn't just let this go. As they rode through the city, Hawk's mind raced. He glanced back at Jamal, who was still shaken but safe, his small hands gripping the back of Hawk's jacket. The boy had been through hell, but now he was free. And that, for Hawk, was worth more than any victory. He could feel the tension in the air, the constant hum of the bikes beneath him, and the ever-present feeling that they were being hunted. They hadn't been followed yet, but Hawk didn't trust it. Not for a second. The serpents were dangerous. They wouldn't stop until they had their revenge. As they neared the outskirts of the city, Hawk signaled for the group to slow down. They had to regroup. There was no way they were going to ride straight into an ambush. Everyone, fall back, he barked into the radio, his voice steady. We're going to take the back roads. Watch your six. The bikers acknowledged the order, their voices crackling over the radio, the sound of their engines slowing down in unison. They turned onto a narrow, deserted road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Hawk kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. He knew the serpents would be coming for them. It was only a matter of time. The road stretched ahead, winding through dense trees and over hills. The cool night air whipped around them, the only sound the steady rumble of the engines. Hawk's heart was still pounding, but now it was more from the anticipation of what was to come. They couldn't stop, not until they were far enough away from the city. Hawk's mind was a whirl of thoughts, but one thing kept coming back to him: Rick. The promise he had made to his fallen friend. He had sworn to protect his family, no matter what, and he wasn't going to break that promise. They couldn't let the serpents tear apart what they had built. As they reached a quiet crossroads, Hawk signaled for the bikers to pull over. They couldn't risk taking the main road any longer. The serpents had too many eyes in the city, and they had to get Jamal somewhere safe. Hawk dismounted and walked over to the rest of the group, his boots crunching on the gravel. All right, he said, his voice low and serious. We'll make camp here for the night. We need to keep moving, but we can't take chances. The bikers gathered around him, their faces illuminated by the flickering headlights. What's the plan? Diesel asked, his voice gruff. Hawk paused for a moment, looking at Jamal, who was sitting on the back of the bike, his face pale but determined. We head north tomorrow, Hawk said finally. We'll take him to the old compound. It's the safest place we've got, but we have to move fast. The group nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They had been through hell together, and this was just another fight. But it wasn't just about the bikers now. It was about keeping a promise. Hawk turned to Jamal, giving him a reassuring smile. You're safe now, kid. We've got your back. Jamal's eyes flickered with gratitude, but his voice was barely a whisper. Thank you, he said. Hawk nodded, but inside, he felt the weight of the responsibility. He wasn't just protecting Jamal anymore. He was protecting everyone who had ever been caught in the crossfire of the serpents. And he would fight until the end to make sure they didn't lose. As the bikers settled in for the night, the sounds of the forest filled the air. The crackle of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind. But even in the quiet, Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He stayed alert, his hand resting on the handle of his bike, ready for whatever came next. The night stretched on, the hours dragging by, but Hawk never let his guard down. He knew the serpents would come for them. And when they did, the Iron Riders would be ready. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the camp. The bikers stayed close, their eyes flicking to the trees and the horizon, scanning for any sign of trouble. But nothing came. For now, they were safe. Hawk couldn't help but think of Rick again. What would his friends say if he were here? Would he be proud of what they were doing? Hawk wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't done yet. The serpents might think they had won, but the Iron Riders were just getting started. As the night stretched on, Hawk's resolve hardened. They had to keep moving. They couldn't stop. Not until they had taken back what the serpents had stolen. And not until they had kept their promise to Rick. The Iron Riders would ride again. And this time, they were bringing the fight to the serpents. I cannot describe the weight of the tension that hung over the camp as the night slowly drifted toward dawn. Hawk sat near the fire, his eyes scanning the dark woods that surrounded them. The sounds of the forest were eerie, the occasional rustle of leaves making his senses go on high alert. The Iron Riders had made it this far, but Hawk knew the hardest part was yet to come. They couldn't stay here much longer. The serpents were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike back. He glanced at Jamal, who was sleeping on the ground, wrapped in a blanket one of the bikers had given him. The boy had been through so much already, and now, it was up to them to keep him safe. Hawk's mind kept racing, thinking of every possible way the serpents could come after them. What if they were already making their move? What if they were being watched right now? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a distant engine. Hawk stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the handle of his bike. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. The rumble of the engine grew louder, and within moments, the bikes of the Iron Riders came into view. The convoy had returned. Hawk let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding his bear clutch, and the rest of the crew pulled in. They had gone out on a reconnaissance mission to ensure the area was clear, but Hawk could see from their faces that they hadn't found anything. Not yet, anyway. Anything? Hawk asked, his voice low but steady. Bear shook his head, his expression grim. No signs of the serpents yet, but we know they're out there. We can't stay here forever. Hawk nodded, the reality of their situation settling in. We leave at first light, he said, his voice firm. We're not waiting around for them to find us. We'll hit the road, keep moving, and get Jamal somewhere safe. The rest of the bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. It was clear that they were all in this together, no matter what came next. As the sky began to lighten with the first rays of dawn, the convoy started up their engines, the roar of the bikes cutting through the stillness of the morning. Hawk felt the weight of his responsibility heavy on his shoulders. But there was no time for doubt now. They had a job to do. Jamal was safe for the moment, but Hawk knew that as soon as the serpents figured out what had happened, they'd come for him. They'd stop at nothing to get him back. But Hawk wasn't going to let that happen. The convoy rolled out, their bikes moving in perfect synchrony, cutting through the still morning air. The landscape blurred around them as they sped toward their next destination. Hawk kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the boy behind him. Jamal had lost everything. His father, his home, his sense of safety. But Hawk had made a promise to Rick, Jamal's father, to keep his family safe. And that's exactly what he was going to do. The convoy moved through the countryside, their destination set in Hawk's mind. He knew the route well, but this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher, the danger closer. The serpents were coming, and Hawk had to be ready. As they rode through the quiet, empty roads, the sound of their engines was the only thing that broke the silence. Hawk could feel the adrenaline building, but he kept his focus sharp. There was no room for error now. They reached a small town about halfway to their destination. Hawk signaled for the group to pull over. They needed to rest for a moment, gather their thoughts, and plan their next move. The bikers parked their bikes, dismounting and stretching their legs after the long ride. Hawk took a moment to look around, scanning the area for any signs of the serpents. The town seemed quiet, almost too quiet. It was a small, run-down place, the kind of town that people passed through without giving it a second thought. Hawk didn't like it. Stay sharp, he muttered to his crew. We don't know what's out there. The bikers nodded, each of them instinctively reaching for their weapons and keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Hawk's gaze flicked to Jamal, who was standing nearby, watching the bikers with wide, wary eyes. He was still a kid, just a boy who had been dragged into a world he shouldn't have to understand. But now, it was up to the Iron Riders to protect him. Hawk's heart ached as he looked at the boy. He could see the fear still in Jamal's eyes, the uncertainty of what would happen next. But Hawk knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anything happen to him. Not while he was still breathing. After a few minutes of tense silence, Hawk signaled to the crew. We move out in 5, he said, his voice steady. The bikers mounted their bikes again, ready to keep moving. As they roared back onto the road, Hawk glanced back at Jamal once more. The boy had climbed onto the back of his bike, holding on tightly, but Hawk could see the fear still etched on his face. Hawk knew that they couldn't stop, not until they had reached safety. But the road ahead was full of danger, and the serpents weren't done yet. They would stop at nothing to get Jamal back. But the Iron Riders weren't going to back down. Not now, not ever. I can feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me as we ride through the fading daylight. The sound of the engines roaring in perfect sync fills the air, but my mind is 1,000 miles away. My focus is on Jamal, on keeping him safe, on ensuring that the promise I made to his father is kept. The road stretches ahead, a mix of shadows and light, but I know the serpents are out there. I can feel it. They won't let this go. Not after what happened. The wind is cool against my face, but inside, I feel the heat of the pressure building. We've been on the road for hours, and there's no sign of slowing down. My eyes flick to Jamal in the rearview mirror, and I can see the exhaustion in his face, the weariness in his small shoulders. This kid has been through so much, and we're not even close to being out of danger yet. The night is closing in, and I know we need to make it to the compound before anything happens. The others are close behind, but it's not just the serpents we need to worry about. It's the uncertainty, the unknowns that come with it. What if they've set up an ambush? What if they're waiting for us to slip up? I push the thoughts away, one step at a time. I glance at my phone as it buzzes in my pocket, but I don't need to check it. It's from Bear. I already know what it says. Stay alert. We've got eyes on us. I tuck the phone back into my pocket and focus on the road. We're close now, just a few miles away. But the closer we get, the more I feel the weight of the promise I made to Rick, Jamal's father. This is bigger than just a rescue. This is about family. This is about making sure nothing, not even the serpents, can tear it apart. The convoy moves through the streets, the sound of the bikes a constant reminder of the strength in numbers. Hawk, the leader, is always in the front. He's been through hell, seen things most people can't even imagine, but he never falters. He knows the stakes. We all do. The road opens up in front of us, and I feel a shift in the air. We're getting close to the compound. The safety, the security of it. But it's still not enough. Not until Jamal is behind those gates. Not until we're sure the serpents can't get their hands on him again. We're almost there. I hear Hawk's voice crackle over the radio. It's calm, but I know the tension is there. He's a leader, a protector, and right now, that's all he can think about. Protecting this family. Keep your eyes peeled. Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into. We round a corner, and I see it. The compound looms ahead, a fortress. In the middle of nowhere. The gates are open, and I can see the familiar faces of the people who are already there, waiting for us. But as we pull closer, I see movement. Shadows in the distance, and my heart stops for a beat. They're here. I mutter under my breath, and I can feel the tension in the air shift. The serpents had found us. We're not done yet. Get ready, Hawk orders, his voice steady as always. We're going in hot. No hesitation. No second guessing. The convoy speeds up, the engines roaring as we close the distance. I look at Jamal again, and I see something in his eyes. He's scared, but there's also something else there. Hope. He knows this is his chance. His chance to finally be safe. The serpents won't win this time. Not on our watch. As we pull up to the compound, I can see the faces of the serpents in the distance. They're waiting for us. They think they've got the upper hand. They think they can take Jamal. But they're wrong. Hawk cuts the engine and signals for the crew to dismount. We're not backing down now. The fight isn't over, but we've got the advantage. Let's move, Hawk says, and we move as one, the bikers falling into formation. The serpents see us, and they start to move, too. But we're faster. We're more prepared. We've got the numbers. I glance over at Jamal, and I see the fear in his eyes. But there's also something else. Confidence. He knows he's not alone anymore. We've got his back, and we're going to make sure he stays safe. The serpents charge toward us, but they're not ready for the force we're about to bring. The Iron Riders move like a well-oiled machine, each of us in sync, each of us knowing our role. Hawk steps forward, his voice booming over the noise. You're done. You're not taking anyone else. The serpents hesitate, unsure of what to do next. But it's too late. We've already surrounded them. The fight is on. It's quick, calculated, and precise. We're not here to kill. We're here to make a statement. The serpents have crossed a line, and now they're going to pay for it. They're going to know that the Iron Riders don't back down, not when it comes to family. The serpents try to fight back, but it's useless. They're outnumbered, outmatched, and outclassed. They've made their move, and now they're going to face the consequences. Hawk steps forward again, his eyes cold and steady. Stay away from us. Stay away from Jamal. The leader of the serpents looks at him, his eyes burning with hatred. You think you've won? He sneers. But Hawk doesn't flinch. No, he says simply. We've only just begun. The serpents retreat, backing away from the compound. They're not giving up, but they know they've lost. We've won this round. The Iron Riders stand tall, their heads held high. Jamal is safe, for now. But Hawk knows this isn't over. Not until every last one of the serpents is taken down. Not until Jamal is completely free. The sound of the engines fills the air as we ride into the compound, the gates closing behind us. For the first time in a long while, I feel a sense of peace settle over me. We've done it. We've kept our promise. I can feel the weight of the last few hours pressing down on me as we settle into the compound. The gates are closed behind us, the sounds of the engines still echoing in my ears, but there's no time to relax. The victory was hard-earned, but it's not over. The serpents may have retreated for now, but we know they'll be back. They won't stop until they get Jamal, or until they get their revenge. The rest of the bikers are still scanning the perimeter, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. But Hawk and I both know the truth. We can't stay here forever. The serpents will regroup, and when they do, they'll come at us with everything they've got. I look over at Jamal, sitting by the fire. His face is still pale, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the fear he's been living with for so long. But there's something else in his eyes now. A flicker of hope. A belief that maybe, just maybe, he can be safe again. He's been through so much, and I can't help but feel responsible for his well-being. We promised Rick. We promised to keep him safe. As the bikers gather around the fire, their voices low and tense, I can hear the concern in their words. They know what's coming. They know we can't stay here long. What's the plan? Bear asks, his voice gruff as he looks at Hawk. Hawk is sitting beside the fire, his face illuminated by the flames, eyes narrowed in thought. We move out tomorrow, he says, his voice steady but heavy with determination. We keep pushing forward. We get Jamal somewhere he can't be touched. The others nod in agreement, their expressions hardening as they realize the full weight of what's ahead. We can't let our guard down. Not yet. Not ever. We'll take him up north. Hawk continues, his voice cutting through the silence. We'll keep him moving, keep him safe. The serpents won't know where we're going. But we can't stop. Not for anything. The rest of the bikers nod in agreement, but I can see the uncertainty in their eyes. They know this won't be easy. The road ahead is filled with danger. We don't know what the serpents have planned. We don't know how far they'll go to get Jamal. But one thing is certain, we're not backing down. I turn back to Jamal, my heart heavy with the weight of what we're asking him to do. He's just a kid. He shouldn't have to live like this. He shouldn't have to keep running. But that's the reality we're facing. The world is a dangerous place, and it's up to us to protect him. You ready for this? I ask him, my voice soft but steady. He looks up at me, his eyes wide but filled with a quiet strength. Yeah, he says, his voice small but determined. I'm ready. The words hang in the air for a moment, and I feel a pang of guilt in my chest. He shouldn't have to be ready for this. He shouldn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But I know one thing for sure. We're going to make sure he doesn't have to do it alone. As the night stretches on, the rest of the bikers settle in, readying themselves for the journey ahead. The stars are out, a cold light flickering overhead, but there's a warmth in the air around us. It's the warmth of camaraderie, of family. We've fought together before, and we'll fight together again. Hawk stands up and looks around at the group, his gaze steady. We stick together, he says, his voice firm. We get through this together. And when it's all over, Jamal's gonna be safe. That's the only thing that matters. There's a moment of silence as everyone absorbs his words. We've all been through hell, but now, we have something to fight for. Jamal. The serpents can come at us all they want. But they'll never take Jamal. Not while we're here. As the night deepens, I sit down beside the fire, my thoughts racing. I know what's at stake. I know what we're up against. But I also know that as long as we stand together, we can face whatever comes next. I look over at Jamal again, and this time, I see something different in his eyes. A glimmer of hope. He's not alone anymore. We'll get him through this. We'll get him to safety. The serpents may think they have the upper hand, but they don't know what they're dealing with. The Iron Riders aren't just a group of bikers. We're a family, and we'll protect our own, no matter what. I can feel the weight of the promise we've all made pressing down on me as we continue our ride toward the northern compound. The engines roar around us, a constant reminder that we're not just riding for the thrill anymore. This is serious. This is for Jamal. This is for Rick. The road stretches out before us, endless, but every mile we cover feels like a victory. The serpents haven't given up, but we've made it this far. We'll make sure we don't let them take back what we've fought for. The air is cool, the night dark, and the world outside seems to fade as we stay focused on the mission ahead. Jamal is safe for now, but I know the battle isn't over. They'll come again, but so will we. The convoy is tight, every biker in perfect formation. The soft hum of the engines is like a second heartbeat. It's reassuring, in a way, but I can't let my guard down. Not yet. I glance back at Jamal. He's still on the bike behind me, his small hands gripping my jacket. But there's something different in his eyes now. A spark of something I haven't seen before. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's the realization that he's not alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, it's the first step toward him finding peace. As we ride, I think back to everything we've been through to get here. The serpents, the danger, the constant fear. But we've made it through. Together. We've lost some along the way, but we've gained something more valuable. We've gained trust. We've gained family. We've gained the strength to face whatever comes next. The hours pass, and soon, the first light of dawn begins to break across the horizon. The road ahead is still long, but there's something in the air now. A feeling of possibility. We're almost there. I can feel it. The compound isn't far now. Jamal looks up at me, his face still tired but a little less fearful. He's come a long way in the past few days. We all have. We're almost home. I say, my voice steady, though my heart is pounding. He nods slowly, but there's a small smile on his face. It's faint, but it's there. The ride has been long, but I can see the end of the road. As we approach the compound, the gates open. It's quiet, calm. Almost too calm. But I know better. I know that the calm before the storm is often the most dangerous. We park the bikes, the sounds of the engines dying down as we dismount. The compound is surrounded by tall fences, the area secure. The rest of the bikers stay alert, watching for any sign of trouble. But for now, we're safe. For now, Jamal is safe. This is it, Hawk says, his voice low but filled with certainty. We made it. The others gather around, nodding in agreement, their faces filled with the same resolve. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. The serpents won't just walk away. But for now, we have what we came for. Jamal is safe. And that's what matters. As we settle in, I take one last look around, making sure everything is in place. The compound is secure, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I allow myself to relax. But even as I do, I know the battle isn't over. The serpents will come again, but we'll be ready. We'll be ready for whatever comes next. I look at Jamal again, standing there among us, his eyes full of wonder and a little fear. He doesn't fully understand the danger yet. He doesn't know how much more we have to fight for. But I will keep him safe. We all will. We've fought for this moment, and we'll fight for the next. Because that's what family does. We fight, and we never back down. The day fades into night, and I know that for now, we've won. But this is just the beginning. The Iron Riders aren't done yet. And neither are we.